Well, our top focus remains all that's been happening in Venezuela in the last 48 hours. President Donald Trump has threatened that Venezuela's new leader will pay a big price, and that is if she refuses to cooperate with the US.
Now, his statement comes after US forces seized and jailed her former president Nicolás Maduro. Speaking to The Atlantic in a telephone interview, Trump said that if interim president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodríguez, did not comply, she would be paying a very big price, probably bigger than Maduro.
And this as US forces attacked Caracas before dawn on Saturday, bombing military targets and spiriting away Maduro and his wife to face federal narco-trafficking charges in New York. Well, the deposed leader is due to appear in a Manhattan court on Monday.
The Trump administration says that it is willing to work with the remainder of Maduro's government as long as Washington's goals, particularly opening access to US investment in Venezuela's enormous crude oil reserves, are met. In another interview, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that discussions of Venezuela holding elections following Maduro's ouster were premature, with Washington focused on ensuring the remaining leadership in Caracas enacts policy changes.
Elections? Well, look, this is a country that's been governed by this regime now for 14 or 15 years. The elections should have happened a long time ago. The elections did happen. They lost them, and they didn't count the votes, or they refused to count the votes, and everyone knows it. So all of that, I think, is premature at this point. There's a lot of work to be done here. Right now, what we are focused in, let's be realistic here, what we are focused on right now is all of the problems we had with when Maduro was there. We still have those problems in terms of them needing to be addressed. We are going to give people an opportunity to address those challenges and those problems. Until they address it, they will continue to face this oil quarantine.
Well, Marco Rubio also suggested that United States would not take a day-to-day role in governing Venezuela other than enforcing an existing oil quarantine on the country, which is a turnaround after President Donald Trump announced a day earlier that the US would be running Venezuela following its ouster of leader Nicolás Maduro.
Now, in the meantime, European Union has reiterated that respect for the will of the Venezuelan people was the only way to restore democracy. In a statement supported by 26 member states, the EU's Foreign Affairs Chief, Kaja Kallas, called for calm and restraint by all actors to avoid escalation and to ensure a peaceful solution to the crisis.
Well, the Venezuelan opposition figure in exile, Edmundo Gonzalez, has responded to Maduro's ouster in an Instagram post from Spain. He said that while the capture of Maduro is an important step, it is not enough to return normalcy in the crisis-hit nation.
On the other hand, Venezuela continues to grapple with their new reality post-Maduro's ouster. The pre-dawn US bombing at the Fort Tiuna military complex in Caracas left residents of nearby Ciudad Tiuna community shaken. The neighborhood was without electricity while smoke was still rising from the mountain near the fort on Sunday. This was shortly after the assault.
At the moment of the bombing, the first thing that came to my mind was that the Americans had invaded because that's what you think. Then my husband told me, grab the child, grab the child. I even went downstairs in my pajamas because we didn't have time to change or anything. In an emergency, you don't think about anything. You could even run out naked without realizing it.
And to discuss all that's been happening in Venezuela, we are being joined by Professor James A. Russell. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. He's an associate professor in Department of National Security Affairs at Naval Postgraduate School. Appreciate you joining us on the broadcast, Mr. James. To begin with, the interim leader has taken oath, has sworn in. US has time and again repeated that it's going to be US, the country that will be governing the affairs in Venezuela. We have a U-turn now coming in from Rubio, who says that the US essentially will not be taking care of the day-to-day affairs. What exactly is happening in Venezuela, and what can we expect in terms of the policy when it comes to Venezuela's oil reserves?
I think it's pretty clear that the Trump administration is making this up as it goes along. We see this very confusing, conflicting statements out of the Secretary of State and President, over what's going to be happening next. We have on the one hand the president talking about running Venezuela. Now we have Rubio saying, oh no, it's going to remain under quarantine. And all this is a recipe for disaster. Anytime you decide to embark upon the use of military force in which you have no clearly defined objectives, you have no way of achieving those objectives, you've overestimated, of course, as political leaders tend to these days, the impact of the role of force on political circumstance. It's the whole thing is a complete and utter mess. And the last thing I would say about this is that the Trump administration has, of course, gutted any of the expertise that it might have been able to draw on in the State Department, the National Security Council, and elsewhere. They've gotten rid of all these people who might have been able to render some sound advice on how to do this.
Understood.
And I should add, there really isn't a good way to do this. There isn't a good way to, this harkens back to the colonial era. This is an era that your viewers, of course, should be very familiar with in terms of history. And this is a very, it's a disastrous development for the international system.
Professor Russell, when it comes to Venezuela, at this point, they have an interim president. And then earlier we heard from Trump that they're going to be running Venezuela. Who is running Venezuela now?
Well, of course, this is, again, not very surprising. And anyone with expertise could have told Trump this and Rubio that the country is going to be run by the Maduro administration. In these authoritarian regimes, and this would be true in Russia, it's true in any of these kinds of places, right, is that the leader has a system of governance in place, and he's got allies in the key ministries. And in the case of Venezuela, again, this is a very common phenomenon in authoritarian regimes. The security services, of course, are closely aligned with the ruling regime. And to expect somehow that you're dealing with a series of different actors who are going to then adopt different policies, I think represents a fundamental sort of misunderstanding of the situation that they're dealing with. But again, this is not surprising in the case of the Trump administration because they don't have any regional expertise to really bear on this complex problem.
There was a government in place in Venezuela, a governance structure in place, and as per that, the vice president now takes over, and that's exactly what we're seeing in Venezuela, and that's what you're pointing out to, Samiksha.
That's right, Mr. Russell. Yes, I'd also wanted to bring in the statements coming in from several world leaders in the last 24 hours. This is a statement that's coming in from the European Union that has called for principles of international law and UN charter must be upheld. How do you weigh in as far as the statement is concerned of the European Union?
I think that Donald Trump has driven yet another nail into the coffin of the UN Charter-based international order, the so-called rules-based system. This is a lawless president. He's a convicted felon. And he is taking this approach to international relations with the basic idea that the rules don't apply to him and they don't apply to the United States. It's a return of the international system to the law of the jungle. This is what existed, of course, in the early part of the 19th century, and the result were world wars. So the European Union is absolutely correct and is absolutely right, of course, to be calling for a return to the rule-based order. And also, by the way, to remind Trump that he shouldn't think about doing the same thing in Greenland, which is to say parachuting in the 101st Division. But I wouldn't put anything past Trump at this point. Again, if there's a point to make to your viewers from the American foreign policy sort of perspective, Trump is returning the world to this world, again, where the law of the jungle dominates, and the rules-based order, the UN Security Council, the United Nations Charter are being flushed into the dustbin of history, regrettably, I should say.
And his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, giving out statements such as the Western Hemisphere belongs to us, only takes you back to the Monroe Doctrine, where you have Russia on the other hand, where speakers from Russia talking about a Russian empire. We seem to be looking at a time which we thought or imagined and hoped that we were past. There will be more to discuss. Professor Russell, thanks so much for making time for us and joining us here on World DNA.
Thank you for having me.